where it needs to where it is at the moment. But yeah, what I think would be helpful is not the you're off out with your mates, son, here, take a 12-pack.
Yeah.
That's probably not
Take a box of beer.
Yeah. Is a box of wine. First of all, give them the classy stuff, please. But secondly, maybe we do want to see a reduction in parents enabling alcoholism or heavy drinking or binge drinking among kids.
Now, The Bachelor on TV3, Jordan and Fleur and Naz, and you would suspect all this will shortly pass from the news, but not yet. And the show rates with younger people better than with the overall population, and it rates with women. Lisa Scott, why?
Yes. Because, quite frankly, I'm glad you asked me this question, because it's our dirty, dirty pleasure of the modern feminist, junk food for the brain. We know it's fake, like extra butter popcorn. It isn't actually got real butter in it, but we like it anyway. And we watch it for the same reason that we watch 7 Sharp, to confirm that everything we thought was wrong with the patriarchy is still wrong, and to yell at the TV. I was yelling things like, she didn't have time to do her roots, and things like, that off the shoulder is not for you, sister. That's why I'm watching it.
Well, here's a woman emailing us saying, I've had this conversation with friends, including a male friend who said, how can you call yourself a feminist and watch The Bachelor? And she says, yes, there is a strange element of self-loathing when one does watch, but I find it fascinating the way the women in the early episodes especially had to balance being a go-getter, i.e. getting alone time, versus not coming across as too pushy. And it's something I think many women will relate to. It's almost impossible to find that balance, especially with all the other women watching and judging. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Too pushy, everyone hates you. Too demure, everyone thinks you're weak and pathetic. So The Bachelor, which is a version of what you're saying, so The Bachelor is every woman's social and career struggles in microcosm.
It's more like watching a documentary about mating crocodiles. It's so foreign to us. I mean, this is a country where if you want to meet a man, you just go down the pub. You don't have to, try your lucky charms for the lukewarm love of Jordan. There's men everywhere, plenty of fish in the sea. That's why it's hilarious. They're lining up in that, and look, her heels. She's wearing heels on grass. It's hilarious.
Steve McCabe shaking his head, but I think he understands you.
I've read about it occasionally because, that's what you see on the front page of the NZ Herald website these days. I've never seen it. I think I would rather chew my own face off than watch it.
The time may come, and perhaps soon, when you cannot share pictures of your children on Facebook without discussion with them and permission from them. We thought we'd end on this because French authorities have warned parents of fines of up to $50,000 and a year in prison for publishing intimate photos of their children on social media without permission. And intimate doesn't mean compromising. It means it could be, says The Guardian, a toddler running around in a nappy or having a temper tantrum, anything that could embarrass them in later life. What do you think?
Well, that's French law. I don't know how it's relevant to anywhere
well,
else.
Let me amplify it then. Eric Delcroix, an expert on internet law and ethics, has told Le Figaro children at certain stages do not wish to be photographed, or still less for these photos to be made public. And the discussion, I take your point, it's French law, but it's gone outside France.
I love the permission thing, because just how binding is a 3-year-old's okay if they're going to sue you later down the line. But parents of teenagers have nothing to worry about, because anybody who's had a teenager knows that there's years in the photo album where they refuse to have their photo taken at all, and so you can't litigate if you're unrecognisable.
Can a minor child legally give consent, or is that's what's the word, delegated to their parents regardless?
Well, that's a good point.
And then so someone who says, "Ma chérie, I hereby give consent on your behalf." I mean, it's easily worked around.
You know, we aren't really snickering at this. I mean, we've never really thought about it, and it seems we may need to, actually.
Yeah, because, I mean, let's face it, children apparently are people too.
Indeed, and on that profound note...
Yeah, not like a teacher to think that way, is it?
On that profound note, we can say goodbye to both our panellists today. Lisa Scott, great to have you on.
Au revoir.
You too, Steve McCabe, and Steve has got a jar of the Fujara chutney in return for your very kind honey.
Looks delicious. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for your company, everybody. And
no condiments down here.
I can always mail you some.
Okay, good.
And we're back on the panel tomorrow, and stand by for John Campbell and Checkpoint on the way.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm John Campbell on behalf of the Checkpoint team. Thank you for joining us. Tonight, how will our future be reported and by whom? We look at the merger between APN and Fairfax and at its impact on how New Zealand stories will be told. The way Māori are seen, we go back to Taranaki and ask two would-be councillors, both Māori, if they know what Andrew Judd is talking about. A group of Hurricanes players break curfew and the Warriors players, punished for their late night, face the media and the future going forward. And John Key gets ejected from Parliament. Yes, the volume is turned up in the Panama Papers. All of that and more in a very busy program tonight. But we begin, as always, with Katrina Batten and RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. The Labour Party is accusing the Prime Minister of losing control after he was thrown out of the House during a heated exchange over the Panama Papers. The Speaker, David Carter, ordered John Key to leave Parliament after he continued to shout despite being told by Mr Carter to stop. Mr Key was responding to questions from the Green Party co-leader James Shaw on why he refuses to apologise to charities for linking them to the Panama Papers. Labour's leader Andrew Little says Mr Key crossed the line by naming the charities and should have come ready to apologise.
It's pretty shameful actually when the Prime Minister gets thrown out. The one person who we do need to know keeps his cool in Parliament is the Prime Minister. He lost it. I think he lost control because he doesn't like being under pressure to do what, a person of good character would do, which is apologise for a glaring mistake.
The Labour Party leader Andrew Little. The Reserve Bank says the government and the Auckland Council can do a lot to fix Auckland's housing shortage. The bank's twice-yearly assessment found the financial system is sound, but there are problem areas that pose a risk to the economy, including Auckland's overheated housing market. Bank Governor Graham Wheeler hasn't acted to rein in housing demand for now, but signalled further restrictions are likely. He wants the government and council to do more.
That's where a lot of the solution lies. It's trying to generate a greater supply-side response. It's not simply this can be fixed with macro-prudential policy. These imbalances are significant.
Mr Wheeler says the government's budget later this month and a decision on Auckland Council's unitary plan in August could help alleviate some of the supply-side constraints. A Flaxmere councillor says family violence is a growing problem in her community and a zero-tolerance approach is needed. The coroner, Carla Nanagara, has found that 4 15-year-old girls who committed suicide within 13 months in the Hastings suburb were each exposed to family violence. The deaths occurred between July 2013 and August 2014. Councillor Jacoby Poltain says New Zealand needs to be much tougher in its approach to family violence.
I believe that we need to take a zero-tolerance approach to family violence. We just let it go on far too much and let children and our toddlers in some situations succumb to the ramifications of that.
Flaxmere councillor Jacoby Poltain. The Hawke's Bay DHB says it's already improved procedures to follow up with people at risk of suicide and will set up a working party to review the coroner's report. Trade union leaders are worried that plans to merge New Zealand's 2 newspaper chains into one will have serious consequences for staff. The media companies APN and Fairfax want to merge their operations. That would bring together the New Zealand Herald, the Christchurch Press, Dominion Post, News Talk ZB and others into one single news gathering machine. The union A2 has been handling media job losses for years, the most recent last Friday, and its media organiser Paul Tollich fears things will get worse.
I think it will lead to a decline in the available jobs for journalists. They have already cut the numbers of sub-editors to a very small number, and you could see that they are going to now cut reporters and frontline journalists.
Paul Tollich says this will also lead to less variety of news gathering. Auckland's Mayor Len Brown acknowledges there are still improvements to be made to the council nearly 6 years on from the amalgamation. A report for the Committee for Auckland think tank says community engagement and a bigger role for local boards need more work, and there's been a failure to tackle social inequality. Mr Brown says addressing big social problems has been almost too hard so far, but the issue of working with communities and boards is improving.
There will continue to be a shaking out period, probably for the next 3 to 6 years. And look, given the fact that it's been the largest amalgamation ever in politics in New Zealand and the largest corporate amalgamation, there's no surprise. I mean, these things don't happen overnight. It's been a hell of a challenge.
The Mayor of Auckland, Len Brown. In sport, Netball New Zealand says it's surprised but isn't rejecting speculation in the Australian media over changes to the Trans-Tasman netball competition. A report in the Sydney Morning Herald says New Zealand and Australian netball teams will no longer regularly play each other in the ANZ Championship, with the competition set to split in two from next year. In a joint statement, Netball New Zealand and Netball Australia say they're close to reaching agreement on the format of the 2017 competition and will make an announcement next week. New Zealand will send its largest gymnastics team to an Olympic Games in over 50 years, with 3 gymnasts named for Rio. Mikhail Gordonov, Courtney McGregor and Dylan Schmidt will all make their Olympic debuts. It will be the first time since the Sydney 2000 Games that a New Zealand gymnast has competed at the Olympics. The Warriors playmaker Shaun Johnson is hoping the latest scandal to hit the National Rugby League club may finally send it in the right direction. 6 players were all stood down after a night out involving prescription medication and energy drinks 2 weeks ago. Johnson says the group have learnt their lesson.
I hope it's a turning point as such. You know, we haven't started the year off too well, and if we can use this, I guess, to push us in the right direction, then yeah, we'll take it.
Shaun Johnson, and that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, harnessing the power of the ocean to generate electricity. Why aren't we doing it? Given we're surrounded by water, Garth Gretton has some answers. Johnny Blades from RNZ International is this week's overseas correspondent, talking about Australia's wars on 2 Pacific Island fronts. One is Norfolk, the other Manus, while our drama is Fiona Samuel's short history of contraception. On Nights, the show for every conceivable occasion on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and there are severe weather watches and warnings in force for many areas. The forecast: Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, scattered rain easing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud and some scattered rain tonight, clearing tomorrow. From Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country, Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson. Rain becoming widespread today, heavy falls tonight, clearing most places tomorrow, but returning to Nelson tomorrow night. Gale or severe gale northwesterlies for Wellington, Wairarapa and Marlborough, especially from tomorrow afternoon. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain heavy at times with squally thunderstorms, severe thunderstorms possible tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, scattered rain at times, but mostly dry in coastal places, gale or severe gale northwesterlies, mainly inland. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, but a period of rain tomorrow morning, possibly heavy. It's just gone 5:08.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. We begin tonight with 2 of New Zealand's largest media heavyweights confirming they are in talks to merge. APN News and Media Limited wants to merge its New Zealand operations with those of Fairfax Media. Now, this would combine NZME's New Zealand Herald newspaper and radio stations like News Talk ZB, a very big player, with Fairfax newspapers like the Dom Post, Christchurch Press, Waikato Times, Southland Times and more into one single news gathering operation. The deal is subject to Commerce Commission approval, and whilst APN is still hopeful a deal can be done by the end of the year, union leaders fear mass job losses and impact on the quality of journalism protected. How will our stories be told and who will they be told by? We're going to look at that in some length tonight. We begin with Eric Frickberg explaining what's going on.
Previous mergers turned most population centres into one newspaper towns, but this proposed merger will push New Zealand to being the brink of a one newspaper country. There'll still be localised news for local papers, but all national material will come from one source. That source will be a merged combination of NZME, owned by APN in Australia, and Fairfax. For the chief executive of APN, Kieran Davis, such a merger would be a huge step forward.
The opportunity to potentially merge with Fairfax New Zealand business will offer quality journalism and a depth of news, sport and entertainment across a diverse mix of print, digital and radio channels. We are in discussions around a potential transaction structure with both parties committed.
The move follows years of financial pressure on the media industry, which has led to repeated waves of job cuts in newsrooms on both sides of the Tasman. But Paul Murphy, who's a union leader visiting from Australia, says changes like these might help company executives balance their budget, but they can make life much harder for the reporter on the front line.
The immediate effect that we see is the stress on journalists, because a smaller number of journalists are being required to write stories for more platforms, to file more often, so the pressure on them has increased enormously.
Too is the main journalists' union in this country. It's been struggling with news media job losses for years, the most recent just last Friday. Its national media organiser Paul Tolich says there'll be more job losses as a result of this, but there's another risk.
The traditional role of the media was to uncover the stories about the powerful and about major institutions which were abusing their power. It used to be called the Fourth Estate, and that was one of the pillars, along with the courts and Parliament, that was the balance in a society to keep it free and democratic.
The proposed merger is already a source of dismay to on-the-road reporters, but few were willing to say so openly because their jobs are potentially at risk. But some observers are more open and they're more philosophical. Former New Zealand Herald editor and news veteran Gavin Ellis believes a change like this is inevitable.
Not a surprise. The way that the newspaper business is going at the moment, consolidation is a necessary component of their future, I think, to try and get economies of scale to cope with their declining advertising revenue.
As part of this deal, APN head office in Australia will push its Herald and ZB offspring out into the cold and make them operate as a standalone company. This will happen with or without a merger with Fairfax, and it'll need approval from shareholders. Then a merger deal will need to be endorsed by the Commerce Commission here. But the boards of both Fairfax and APN are pushing hard for this and believe they have a strong case. And they're planning at this stage to have the whole deal finished this year. For Checkpoint, Eric Frickberg.
Eric Frickberg reporting. We've got Tim Murphy coming up. He's sitting beside me in the studio. But first, as Eric said, if the deal is approved, it could be completed by December this year. That does seem wishful thinking, but it is possible. The move has some questioning the fate of the newspapers produced by both organisations if the companies do merge. We went to the streets of Wellington to ask people how they get their daily news and if they still read a physical newspaper.
Yes, occasionally, when I get it for free at work.
How do you usually get your news?
Online. I've got a New Zealand Herald app, and that's pretty helpful.
I did this morning, actually. Yeah, only because I was where I was staying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think most people read the newspaper?
No, a lot of people read it online, don't they?
Radio New Zealand is how I usually get my news, but occasionally when I'm procrastinating I'll read the newspaper. I'd say most people get it online.
There's always going to be a place for newspapers in some form as long as there's things to report.
I think there's sort of a classic element to it. I think people still enjoy a bit of paper. Yeah, I think so, maybe in a cafe and restaurants and stuff, but I think, on the go, nobody really has paper anymore, a bit old school.
I read the paper every day.
Internet, mostly. Yeah. But paper would be NZ Herald.
I have the News Hub app, so I get most of my newsfeed from there. Facebook.
So, what might a merger mean for audiences and for the media industry here in New Zealand? Tim Murphy was editor-in-chief at the New Zealand Herald, which is owned by APN, of course, until April of last year. Tim, it's great to have you with us in the Auckland studio. Thank you for joining us in person.
Pleasure.
You wrote about this very presently in Spin-Off, and you basically prefigured pretty much what is going to happen. Why do you think it's happening?
Two reasons. The Australian owners see the New Zealand assets as being challenged, dragging their price down, and they'd rather New Zealand went on its own. And the second is, from the New Zealand point of view, it's a defensive move by publishers because they are under such pressure from the big platforms, Facebook, Google, Amazon even, Instagram, Snapchat, so that their need to get revenue in is desperate, really.
And one way or another, something had to be done because money is being lost now, right?
Yeah, the costs are still high. There may well be, and there probably will be, job losses through this. But there would be, this year, next year and the year after, job losses in both those companies as well if they carried on as they are.
Okay, so it's all very well on behalf of those of us who love the media and everyone who needs and consumes the media and values the role of the Fourth Estate in the life of a country to feel that this is heartbreaking news, but something was going to happen inevitably.
Yes, it is heartbreaking, and it will be for those whose roles are at risk. But I think the way we have the media now is that new voices are coming up all the time as well. It's not a zero-sum game. It won't be that these two come together, a number of people leave, and that's the end of that journalistic voice. New ventures are out there happening now. The voices will change. For big platforms, there are going to be fewer outlets, yes, initially. I think, though, that we've got to look at it and say, well, this is the way it's changing. This might just bring it to a head rather than let it die slowly through 1,000 cuts.
So what will the new beast look like?
Well, it'll be geographically quite distinct still, because they only publish the papers really in their own territory. So I don't think papers necessarily are more at risk from this merger than they were before, from the structural issues and the economic issues.
So if you're listening in Marlborough and you love the Express, or if you're listening in Nelson and you love the Mail, are you still going to get it?
Possibly not, but not because of this merger. I think they wouldn't be looking to cut those papers because they've got one company running them. That may well be another equation, which is there's not enough revenue out of there and there's too much cost in general to sustain it, but it wouldn't be because of the merger. What will change, I think, will be in digital space. There's stuff.co.nz and New Zealand Herald.co.nz. And they're very big, 2 million, 1.6 million unique audience each per month. If they come together, that's a huge entity. They won't have that entire audience because it's duplicated, but if they come together, that may give the chance for that combined company not to kill off one of those brands, but to turn one of them instead into a quality site and charge, and introduce a paywall or a value gate, whichever euphemism you like to use for it. It gives the chance perhaps to say we don't need to fight to the death with each other, so one can play the clickbait job and one can play the other.
Because the argument against a paywall at the moment is whoever blinks first and says you have to pay to come to our site is going to suffer an enormous hit. So if you own both sites, then you can spread the risk.
Yes, and introduce one of them charging small amounts, but enough revenue to fill the gaps that the advertising is leaving, Yeah,
you use the word clickbait, which journalists hate it. But of course, sites are competing constantly for attention. Look at me, look at me, look at me. So if they're not competing against each other, would we be able to see potentially more quality journalism, more investigative journalism, more long-form journalism, less concerns with clickbait?
Not on both the sites, or even on if there's only one of them there, because they're still going to look after that audience. And you've got to give people what they want, and that those metrics are clear. But I think if they play both and they introduce a paywall, probably for the Herald site, you could see that happening.
Why the Herald site? Why do you?
Well, because I think the Herald's always did have a stronger brand value for quality and for depth and consideration. It doesn't tend to now because I think they have mimicked stuff. There's a phrase they use in the States, which is they've fallen into the crap trap. And I think that's happened a bit there.
Are they ready to go? Has the work been done on a paywall? Are they positioned to move on it?
APN, NZME, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that could be turned on any time.
Okay. Can we talk about job losses? You care to estimate the kind of numbers we might be seeing?
It's hard to tell. You've got 3,000 people in total. Those aren't journalists, that's everybody. There'll definitely be room, if this is approved and it goes ahead, for cuts, job losses in all those kind of support areas of IT and procurement and buildings and property and sales for sure, and in journalism, because while they're distinct geographically for their newspapers, in Auckland, for example, there's 2 big newsrooms, and in Wellington a big newsroom servicing Stuff and the Herald. And there's double ups I think you'd see in things like the motoring section and the verticals online for life and style and travel, food, those kinds of things. Now, that's the sort of area. Plus, there's 3 Sunday papers that they'll own all of. So you'd see either, I think, some kind of sale or closure of one of those.
So we've got the Sunday News, the Sunday Star Times and the Herald on Sunday.
Yeah. And
so 2 of the 3 will survive. You don't think all 3 will?
I can't imagine that they'd be allowed to continue with all of that. Although, having said that, Fairfax's predecessor had both Sunday papers before the Herald on Sunday started, so maybe that's the example there.
Tim, one final question. This is bad, but inevitable, and it could have been worse. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I do think so. I think one of these companies, or one of their major journalistic entities, may well have fallen in coming years entirely, had they not been able to put something together. The other thing to think about here is that the companies that own these papers and sites at the moment are, by their nature and because of their duty, interested in making money. It may well be that this allows some other owners, other ownership models to develop with some of these assets or some of these market gaps by people who love journalism and the community debate.
Tim Murphy, former Editor-in-Chief of the New Zealand Herald. Thanks so much for joining us, Tim, and coming to the studio. We really appreciate your time. We would love your feedback on this. Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Let's go to the other news of the day. Well, there's been lots of it, but this is the other big New Zealand story. The Prime Minister has been kicked out of the House for the first time ever during a heated exchange on the Panama Papers. John Key was being grilled on why he refused to apologise to Greenpeace, Red Cross and Amnesty for linking them to the Panama Papers when he failed to stop talking despite the Speaker, David Carter, standing, which is important. When the Speaker stands, you stop, and repeatedly telling him to do so. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
It's the first time John Key has been thrown out of the House. The last time a Prime Minister was thrown out was when it happened to Helen Clark more than a decade ago, back in 2005. The Speaker, David Carter, ordered Mr Key out during question time while he was answering a question from Greens co-leader James Shaw.
Why will he not apologise to Greenpeace International, Amnesty and Mojo Mathers for misrepresenting them in the House yesterday?
Mr.
Speaker,
the Right Honourable Prime
Speaker,
Minister.
I haven't misrepresented Greenpeace. They're in the database as a beneficiary of the Exodus Trust. I don't like the fact they're there, but they are there. So in what way have I misrepresented them? I think the member should do this. I think he should get on his feet and he should say, John, on Saturday night, I went on TV.
Order. Prime Minister will resume his seat. Order. The Prime Minister will leave the chamber. When I stand to my feet, it happened yesterday, I gave him fair warning. When I stand to my feet and call for order, he is to be treated no differently to any other member in this House. The Prime Minister will leave the chamber.
The Labour Party leader, Andrew Little, says John Key has lost control.
It's pretty shameful, actually, when the Prime Minister gets thrown out. The one person who we do need to know keeps his cool in Parliament is the Prime Minister. He lost it. I think he lost control because he doesn't like being under pressure to do what, a person of good character would do, which is apologise for a glaring mistake.
Amnesty, Greenpeace and the Red Cross were mentioned in a searchable database released this week by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. But the charities say they had been the victim of a scam where fraudsters used their names as a front to hide their money in foreign trusts. The Green Party has accused the Prime Minister of mudslinging by bringing up the charities' names in Parliament, but John Key says he was simply just stating the facts.
Well, they're in the database. I'm not making it up. What it goes to prove, actually, is that a lot of New Zealanders are having their name dragged across the TV set at night who are unwittingly implicated simply by going about and doing their things. They may have no knowledge of what's happening at all.
The Red Cross says it has one of the most recognised, respected and trusted symbols in the world, and it works hard to keep it that way. Amnesty says it's disappointed John Key insinuated it was linked with foreign trusts, while Greenpeace is calling for the Prime Minister to apologise. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
Coming up on Checkpoint with a time of 5:23. How racist is New Zealand? Two Māori candidates standing for the Taranaki District Council urge Mayor Andrew Judd, who was on Checkpoint last night, to stay, to run again for the mayoralty. We'll talk to them shortly. 4 teenage suicides within 13 months in the Hastings suburb of Flaxmere have led to a coroner calling for a multi-agency crackdown on family violence. And a 17-year-old gymnast from Christchurch is the newest member of New Zealand's Olympic team bound for Rio. All of that and more coming up. But first, more restrictions on home buyers appear to be on the way as the Reserve Bank struggles to rein in a surging house market, still surging. The Reserve Bank's latest 6-monthly assessment found the financial system is sound, but its governor, Graham Wheeler, highlighted problem areas: Auckland's still overheated housing market and weak dairy prices. But some argue solving Auckland's housing market lies with politicians, not central bankers. Our economics correspondent, Patrick O'Mara, reports.
The Reserve Bank Governor Graham Wheeler is in no doubt that lending restrictions on first-time home buyers and investors have helped strengthen the financial system's resilience.
If you take, for example, the proportion of their loan book that is highly leveraged, if you went back to 2013, that comprised 21% of the bank's loan books across the banking system. Now that ratio is down to 13%. So the banks are more resilient as a result of those loan-to-value ratios.
But Auckland's housing market is not easily subdued. The latest figures from the Real Estate Institute show Auckland's house prices rose 14% in the last year, making it one of the most expensive cities in the world relative to income. Mr Wheeler didn't move today, but he says further lending restrictions are on the cards.
We were concerned about the Auckland problem, still are concerned about that. We're concerned about house price inflation rising in other parts of the country. But we haven't decided on two things. One, whether to move, or two, what the nature of that would be.
Mr Wheeler also wouldn't be drawn on when any further restrictions might be introduced. Some analysts are picking that could happen by the end of the year. While loan-to-income limits are one option, the chief economist at the ASB Bank, Nick Tuffley, says much would need to be done to make those workable. He's expecting tighter rules for investors in Auckland.
It does look likely the Reserve Bank will end up moving to tighten up its Auckland investor restrictions. We do see the market in Auckland continuing to lift up. But in contrast, the Reserve Bank seems pretty sanguine about the fact that house prices are picking up around the rest of the country.
The Labour Party's finance spokesperson, Grant Robertson, says the Reserve Bank can only do so much, and he blames Auckland's housing crisis squarely on the government's hands-off approach.
The Reserve Bank feels it's done its share of the work in the housing crisis. The government now has to step up, and it's failed to do that over the last few years, and I actually can't see that changing in the short term.
The Finance Minister, Bill English, in turn believes the Auckland Council's unitary plan, which, among other things, will decide where and how high the region can build, will provide the solution to Auckland's woes.
There's a national interest here, and it's the government's job to be a guardian of that national interest, and we want to make sure the council understands that we expect the plan to meet whatever pressures around local interests, but it also has to meet the national interest because of the potential for that Auckland market to destabilise the whole economy.
Mr English says unless the unitary plan results in more houses, the Reserve Bank will have no choice but to take further steps to curb lending. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
5:27 to sport now, and the Hurricanes rugby team, who've been on the road in South Africa and are coming off the back of a demoralising loss, have confirmed a small group of players broke a team curfew and look set to be stood down for the team's next game, which is back in Wellington on Saturday against the Queensland Reds. The incident reportedly happened before the team's loss over the weekend, and a Hurricane source says it has, and I quote, destabilised the team. As the Hurricanes consider their response to this incident in rugby league, the Warriors are moving on from their response to something roughly similar. They suspended 6 players after a late night involving prescription drugs and energy drinks. 2 of the players are back with the team this weekend for a now crucial encounter against Sydney's Penrith Panthers. And today, in advance of that game, those 2 players, along with others, including Shaun Johnson and their coach Andrew McFadden, fronted for the media.
This will be fun.
Shaun Johnson, 110 games for the Warriors, one of rugby league's great magicians, fronting on behalf of a team that really ought to be doing better than it is. Can I ask you about team culture?
Oh, yep.
How is it? How are you as a group? I mean, are you happy?
Yeah, we're happy.
Happy, but somehow slightly awry. The season so far, played 9, won 4. Injuries, yes, and costly ones too. Breaches of team standards, yes, 6 for mixing prescription drugs and energy drinks, staying out late and being tardy the next day. This off the back of a 42-0 loss. Shaun Johnson, who wasn't one of the 6 and who just wants to do his talking on the field, was moving on.
Yeah, look, we're moving on. We realised we had some issues and they got dealt with, and those boys are working hard, and we're there supporting them and just trying to move on.
And do you think this might be a turning point in the season in terms of galvanising people, bringing you together, and also making you understand that the coach is the boss?
Oh, I think we always knew the coach was the boss. But look, I hope it's a turning point as such. You know, we haven't started the year off too well, and if we can use this, I guess, to push us in the right direction, then yeah, we'll take it.
Why haven't you started the year too well? Because it's a good team on paper.
Really, yeah, we
had
are a good
some
team
injuries.
on paper. Yeah, look, we haven't performed, you know, in certain games, and you know we've won a few, but obviously not enough. And there's many reasons for that, but yeah, like I said, mate, we're just working hard. We're just looking to move forward.
Moving forward, moving on, the players said it over and over. Bodine Thompson, a popular and respected player, but one of the six stood in front of the media like a boy made to apologise to the class by his teacher. He said stuff like,
yeah, we're just excited to be back this week, and we look forward to going out there this weekend.
Yep. And then he said,
yeah, we're just looking forward to this week.
And then the poor bugger said,
just awesome to be back this week, looking forward to this week.
In short, what they want to do is get the hell away from the media and play. And it may be that what's happened in the Warriors will be the shot in the arm the team needs.
Oh, look, we've definitely got to move forward. You know, there's been lots of attention around it, and you know, we've worked through that, but certainly we've got to start to focus on football again and Penrith this week.
That's Andrew McFadden, the team's coach. He too began on message moving forward this week, you know it. But the man who once played for the Canberra Raiders knows that the best way of moving forward is not through what you say, but what you do. Andrew, you talked about what you're trying to build here. What are you trying to build here?
We're trying to build a team that we can be proud of. You know, we do get criticised a lot, and some of a lot of that's justified, and we are trying to turn things around so that, you know, that we have a team here that everyone's proud of, and we can walk around and feel good about it.
And what would make you proud? Obviously results, but what else?
Oh, we need to be consistent. You know, we need to show the type of spirit that we had last weekend, you know, weekly. And, you know, that's what we've got to try to create every week.
And is there an obligation to be role models as well?
Oh, look, there's no doubt about that. You know, when you walk into this business, you automatically have a profile, so you need to behave in a certain way, and you know, if you don't see that as a burden and see as that's something that you can actually influence people in a positive way, then, you know, I think that's the attitude we want.
That's the attitude we want. Can they beat Penrith this weekend, the team just above them on the ladder? Well, they want to, and they need to. Ask the Magic Sean Johnson, who in the shuffling and transferring culture of the NRL has played his entire career for the Warriors.
We all slip up, we all make mistakes, but you know, for me, I just want to win games, and we want to have our best team out there at all times. So if we see them with the right attitude, then yeah, let them play.
Let them play. Great words. Just ask Bodine Thompson, the Tauranga boy who played his first grade game, aged 16. He was born for league, and now he just wants to play it.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be back this week. Like I said before, it's been a long week and feels like an eternity with everything that's gone on. But yeah, I'm just excited to be back this week and can't wait to make amends.
And off he went to train and then to play. Coming up on Checkpoint 2, Taranaki District Councils. Candidates urge Mayor Andrew Judd to stay on as Mayor. Tourism New Zealand says it will stop promoting the country in the high season because operators can't cope with any more tourists over summer. We look at the Auckland super city 5 years on, yes, 5 years, and Courtney McGregor creates New Zealand history. The teenager from Christchurch tells us about her fundraising road to Rio. Nona has business news, but first here's Katrina Baden with the news headlines.
The Labour Party is accusing the Prime Minister of losing control after he was thrown out of Parliament during a heated exchange over the Panama Papers. The Speaker, David Carter, ordered John Key to leave the House after he continued to shout despite being told to stop. Mr Key was responding to questions from the Green Party co-leader James Shaw on why he refuses to apologise to charities for linking them to the Panama Papers. Labour's leader Andrew Little says Mr Key crossed the line by naming the charities. The Reserve Bank says the government and the Auckland Council can do a lot to fix Auckland's housing shortage. The bank's twice-yearly assessment found the financial system is sound, but there are problem areas that pose a risk to the economy, including Auckland's overheated housing market. A child has been transported to Dunedin Hospital after being attacked by a dog. St John responded to the attack in the suburb of Tainui just after 2:30 this afternoon. A St John spokesperson says the girl sustained serious injuries. A Flaxmere councillor says a zero-tolerance approach is needed to family violence. A coroner has found that 4 15-year-old girls who committed suicide within 13 months in the Hastings suburb were each exposed to violence at home. Councillor Jacoby Poltain says New Zealand needs a much tougher approach to family violence. Trade union leaders are worried that plans to merge New Zealand's two newspaper chains will lead to job losses. The media companies APN and Fairfax want to merge their operations this year. That would bring together the New Zealand Herald, the Christchurch Press, Dominion Post, Newstalk ZB and others into a single news-gathering machine. But the union, Air2, says that would reduce the range of information available to the public. I'll have more news, sport and weather at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. As we've heard, there is a lot of news on the business front today, Nona, in addition to house prices and the shake-up in the media industry. What else is there to talk about, Nona?
Oh, my goodness, yes, there's something else. There's Sky City. Yeah, Sky City is going to offer existing shareholders a deal where they can buy shares at $4.40 for every 10 that they own, and that's so that the company can try and raise $263 million. That's like $250 million plus, right?
Yeah, so why do they want to raise it?
Well, they have an issue with the amount of debt they're taking on. They got more than $1 billion worth of projects in the pipeline, and that's not just the International Convention Centre here in Auckland, but also the Adelaide Casino in Australia. They're revamping that as part of a larger project. So they've got, the $700 million project here in Auckland and a $300 million Australian project in Adelaide.
So give us those numbers again. For every 10 shares you own, you're able to buy
a share for $4.40.
And what are they currently trading at?
Well, they're not trading at the moment. There's been a trading halt, so they were $5.01.
Okay.
So it's a pretty good deal. If you're a shareholder, you can buy these shares, and
slightly more than a 10% discount, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. And so meanwhile, though, I mean, it's raised a lot of questions because very little information is available from the company, partly because Nigel Morrison has departed. And so they didn't have really very much information available for analysts to put their teeth into. The shares aren't trading, so you can't really tell what the market reaction is. So it's a little bit of a tricky one to follow.
And given that there are now going to be more shares in circulation once this has happened, there will inevitably be a fall in the price of the shares.
That's right.
Making the discount less attractive at some level.
Yeah, well, it's been a really complicated story to follow, and I spoke to, I don't know how many analysts I tried to get to talk to me, but none of them were really talking, so I don't know. I guess we'll just have to wait till the 16th of May to find out how the market really reacted to it. Right. Okay, so that's our main, that was the thing I worked on today, in addition to all the other things that were happening on our plate. So look, the index ended the day up 0.5% by 35 points to 6,944, and the New Zealand dollar was trading at 69.9 US cents and 92.3 cents Australian.
So still hovering around 92.
Well, it had a really funny kind of a day because yesterday there was some news out there that perhaps Bill English had sort of tipped that the Reserve Bank would impose some kind of new lending restrictions or some other kind of restrictions to curb in those house prices. That didn't happen. So the market had priced in this idea, Anyways, in the end of the day, we had some volatility, but it all ended about where it was yesterday.
Thanks so much, Nona Peltier. Appreciate it, Nona. It's 21.5 to 6. Last night on Checkpoint, we spoke to Andrew Judd, the current Mayor of New Plymouth, who's decided not to seek re-election after receiving abuse for campaigning for greater Māori representation in Taranaki. We've only been on air since January, but your reaction to that interview was by far the strongest reaction to anything we've broadcast in those 4 months. The interview is available on our webpage. But here's part of what Andrew Judd said. He's talking about the kinds of things people have said to him.
Things like, if I'd known you stood for this Māori stuff, I would never have supported or voted for you. You're done, mate. Māori don't need special treatment. They just need to be more like us. You're so misguided, Andrew. You're a one-term fella. You're not a politician. You're an idiot. You're a bigot. You're a separatist. You're supporting apartheid. You've got to drop all this Māori stuff. The classic one is, we're all one now, Judd, get over it. And I say, well, if we're all one, let's all be Māori. Because what you're saying is, what? Whose version of one are you implying we should all be? Because the reality to that is, we have cultural differences. Yes, we're one country, one passport, one rule, one law, but there are differences. To say we're all one is to disregard the minority of the tangata whenua by implying they should be what? As someone said to me, they just got to be more like us.
It's Andrew Judd, who is the Mayor in New Plymouth. He's Pākehā, of course. Now, amongst the feedback we received was from Māori people throughout New Zealand, not just Taranaki, saying, yes, that's our life. We hear that stuff all the time. So we went back to Taranaki today to speak to two Māori men who are running for council in the upcoming local body election. So same local body. Their names are Bill Simpson and Chris Manukonga. Both oppose the idea of a Māori ward on council, in part because they dream of widespread Māori representation as an ordinary fact of life, not an artificial construction. Both support the Mayor and his comments, and both, starting with Bill Simpson, know exactly what he's talking about.
Well, can I put it this way, is that the best way to explain that is that I think most Māori have been victims for most of their lives. When we brought our children up, one of the things we told them is this: you come into this world with two basic flaws. First of all, you're Māori, and second, with my daughters, you're female. Therefore, you have to work 3 times as hard just to prove yourself within this community. But it's something that we've kind of normalised around here. And through Mr. Judd's, what Mr. Judd has, what Mayor Judd has actually said, is probably just illuminated what has already been there.
Chris, can I ask you about this? Do you believe that you have been the victim of racism often in your life? Casual racism, implicit, explicit, of varying degrees. Do you think it has been something that you have been the victim of?
Well, I also have had the, the thoughts in my mind always that to work harder, to strive harder, and you'll need to watch your P's and Q's, because anything and everything that you say or do will be scrutinised harder. And so therefore, to me, and I've even spoken to bosses and managers that I've worked for, that I understood that that's how I would have to work for them. So, and that is as being Māori.
Bill, you are running for council. Do you think...
I am.
And do you think it is harder for you to be elected than for somebody who is obviously Pākehā?
Yes. Yes, I do. I think it is much harder.
Why?
Can I ask you a question? Because I know you're asking me the question. Is this: if Mr. Judd was Māori and he came out with the same issues, do you think this would be publicised as strong as it is now?
My honest answer is probably not. And the reason for that, I think, is that he is talking about his own journey from having a profoundly Pākehā worldview to a much more empathetic sense that actually that's not reflective of how Māori see the world, and he needs to be considerate of that. So in a way, that's what makes it the story, isn't it? The journey from his very Pākehā worldview to a much more two-eyed way of seeing the world. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. And I'm telling you what, our people totally support Mr. Judd and his views, and we support him in the way in which he has brought it in the forefront and on the TV.
So, Bill, by asking me that question, are you suggesting that actually what Andrew Judd has been saying is exactly what Māori experience all the time, but no one's interested in that because they're only Māori? Is that what you're saying, really?
What I'm really saying to you is this. Māori have been saying what Mr. Judd has been saying for a number of years, but no one's actually paid attention.
And he raised it. He raised the fact that because he's made the change, he's now changing from his racist view of life. Well, I don't consider that what he is doing is turning away from being a racist, what I do is I just find he's learning more and growing more as an individual. And that's fantastic. And he should take that forward by standing again.
You would like him, Chris and Bill, you would like Andrew Judd to stay on, to run again as mayor?
I'm disappointed that he's actually stood up and said he's not going to stand again, because I think, like most people in public office, if they believe in something strong enough, they should remain in place. And for him walking out now, that's a decision he must make, and we've got to respect that. But in respect to racism within the Taranaki region and here, I think there needs to be a full investigation, because we grew up with it in here in Waitara. We grew up with it in Taranaki, and we've normalised it, so it's not so clear today as it was, say, yesterday, until Mr. Judd did what he did.
Bill Simpson and Chris Manukonga, who are both running for council in the upcoming local body elections. Meanwhile, a Mass University researcher says the way Māori are talked about in the media is wider than Taranaki, much wider, and reinforces racist attitudes throughout society. Dr. Raymond Nairn says Andrew Judd's story sheds light on how Māori have always been portrayed and how those who are seen defending Māori are shut down or publicly shunned. Mohammed Hassan reports.
Dr. Raymond Nairn describes himself as a Pākehā of Scottish and English descent. He's been studying the way media portrays Māori his whole career and says not much has changed. In fact, he says the recent experience of New Plymouth Mayor Andrew Judd is a textbook example.
Māori are essentially separated out from other New Zealanders. People who support Māori in efforts to have a voice in politics or to advance Māori interests, well, they're labelled radicals, extremists, activists, and seen as a threat.
In 2012, he helped publish a study comparing the way Māori stories were told in English language media versus Māori language media.
There was literally no comparison. The English language coverage was very selective. It focused on particularly Māori men being violent, aggressive, harming children. There was no balancing narrative. It was as if there were no Māori in the respectable middle New Zealand.
TVNZ confirmed this week it is reviewing comments made by presenter Mike Hosking after the 7 Sharp presenter called Andrew Judd out of touch with middle New Zealand and said Māori who want to be in council should be elected only if they are good enough to earn votes. Some viewers said the comments were racist and have asked the state broadcaster to apologise. Dr. Nairn says while media organisations don't invent racism, they often adopt discriminatory language because they believe it is more accessible to viewers.
They use this kind of language, sometimes because they don't know any other, and sometimes because it never occurs to them that the way that they're constructing the world, thinking about the world, understanding people, is just demeaning, racist, and destructive.
So, does New Zealand have an issue with racism? RNZ reporter Tom Furley went to the streets of Auckland to ask.
Would you consider yourself at all racist?
In some respects, I more than likely am racist.
Prejudiced occasionally, possibly, but not necessarily based on colour.
I'm not racist. I quite admire Māori that get off their arse and do something, just like any other person out there in society.
No, not myself or anyone that I tend to hang out with,
No, not at all.
Oh shit, no. Not at all. No. I'm accepting of everyone.
No, I don't think I'm racist at all. I think my generation's a lot better than our parents' generation, and it's improving slowly, and it's getting better through our kids in schools. But yeah, we could do better as a country overall.
We also asked people if they thought racism was a big problem in New Zealand.
I wouldn't say it was a huge problem, but it's definitely something that you do come across.
The media build it up quite a bit, but there's some work that can be done to make it better, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely common. I mean, it's some behind closed doors though. You won't see it written on any blog anywhere, but in the private conversations over the dinner table, it's definitely very prevalent.
There is a certain amount of racism around, yes. Just by what you hear about things, snide remarks still going around.
So, for the most part, people say they're not themselves racist, but it is a problem. As for the media, Dr. Raymond Nairn says organisations can do a lot more than just apologise, but to educate their staff about stereotypes and the way they view Māori.
I think it's much more important They do those professional training processes so that they're not as vulnerable to this kind of off-the-cuff, common-sense, everyday racism.
For Checkpoint, Mohammed Hassan.
4 teenage suicides within 13 months in the Hastings suburb of Flaxmere has led to a coroner calling for a multi-agency crackdown on family violence. A coronial inquest found all 4 girls were exposed to family violence. The coroner is now recommending extra support be given to troubled young people and wants government agencies to take action. Dean Bedford reports.
The deaths occurred between July 2013 and August 2014. And all 4 girls were aged 15. Their names are suppressed. In her findings, the coroner, Kala Nanagara, said they had each suffered high levels of physical, verbal or emotional family violence. In one case, the girl was believed to have been the victim of family violence and of a sexual assault. In a second case, the girl had attempted suicide twice before and had posted on Facebook she wanted to die. In the third case, the girl had a violent alcoholic father and violent relationships with her mother and boyfriend. She'd also been the victim of sexual abuse at the age of 10. In a fourth case, the girl had been beaten with a stick and was affiliated at a young age with the Black Power gang. A Flaxmere councillor, Jacoby Poltain, says family violence is a problem in the community.
From the evidence that I understand exists, that it is an increasingly prevalent problem or issue in my community. However, I also believe it's a New Zealand national issue. New Zealand's got some of the worst family violence statistics probably in the OECD or the Western developed world. So I think it's actually a national cultural issue that's unfortunately being made prevalent in our community.
Ms Poltain says New Zealand needs to be much tougher in its approach to family violence.
I believe that we need to take a zero tolerance approach to family violence. We just let it go on far too much and let children and our toddlers in some situations succumb to the ramifications of that.
In investigating the deaths, the coroner held meetings with education and health agencies as well as the police. She has made extensive recommendations, including setting up a coordinated multi-agency response to young people at risk of suicide, the automatic appointment of a lawyer for children in family violence cases, and giving judges the power to direct counselling for children exposed to family violence. Coroner Nanagara also recommended establishing a drop-in whānau wellbeing facility in Flaxmere to provide support for families and young people. Henare O'Keefe has campaigned for years against violence and is also a district councillor representing Flaxmere. While he's welcoming the report, he says it's not just government agencies which have to act.
A better approach from right across the board, not just agencies, a better approach from mums, dads, grandparents. It's a community mandate, I would suggest.
Mr O'Keefe says the community has been devastated by the cluster of suicides.
At a time like that, there's not a hell of a lot you can say to the ones that are left behind. There's not a heck of a lot. Sometimes you just have to be there to pick up the pieces and just shuffle along beside them. But it is devastating, as it would be for any community.
The Hawke's Bay DHB says it has already improved procedures to follow up with people at risk of suicide. And its chief executive, Kevin Snee, says he will set up a team to review the recommendations in detail and report back to him. The Ministry of Health's Director of Mental Health, Anthony Duncan, says the report makes for tough reading, and it will be working with the DHB to consider the recommendations. For Checkpoint, Dean Bedford.
Tourism New Zealand will stop promoting the country in the high season because tourism operators simply can't cope with any more tourists over summer. The move comes as tourism leaders predict visitors will continue to break records in coming years. Sharon Brett-Kelly reports from the tourism industry's annual conference, Trends in Rotorua.
It's speed dating time at Trends, and the sound of the conch marks the start of another meeting session between tourism operators and buyers. The operators have just 15 minutes before the buyer they are trying to woo moves on. Shane Adcock runs Hamner Springs Thermal Pools and Spa. He's just had a bumper summer. Some days he had to turn people away.
In January, we would get 4,000 to 4,500 people through the pools. And it does taper off, so that in the middle of winter we might have days where we might only get 500. It's very much peaks and valleys, I guess you'd say.
It's the peaks and lows of tourism that the industry wants to fix. Tourism New Zealand Chief Executive Kevin Bowler says all $90 million of its marketing budget will now be spent on selling the country in the off-peak seasons. He says operators are full in summer, but they need more tourists in spring and autumn.
What Tourism New Zealand will do is it will focus all of our promotional efforts on promoting travel to New Zealand outside the peak season. What we're finding is operators are saying to us that New Zealand's pretty full over the peak and there's plenty of demand. Where the opportunity really sits is growing the spring and autumn periods.
Visitor arrivals topped more than 3 million in the last 12 months and are expected to hit 4 million in 2018. But the graphs show a sharp spike in summer. Air New Zealand Chief Executive Christopher Luxon says that has to change.
We have tremendous growth in the peak of the season of New Zealand, but it's a very peaky industry. And so if we can try and push traffic out to those shoulder seasons, we've done some of the same things. We've actually pushed a lot of our promotion in Japan has been in off-peak times of the year. All of a sudden our Japanese business is up 11% in the last year.
When the Tourism Industry Association launched its growth plan 2 years ago, its goal was to have an industry worth $41 billion a year by 2025. The numbers are already outstripping expectations, with visitor spending surging by at least 20% in 2 years. But the Chief Executive, Chris Roberts, says many regions are missing out.
I personally think we could be charging foreign visitors to a national park a fee. Now, how we do that, the mechanics of all that we can work through, but those are the kind of ideas that we need to be kicking around and thinking about. Could you get to a place where a tourist coming to New Zealand or to a place like Dock actually adds value back to and improves the quality of the estate as a result?
The Tourism Industry Association's Tourism 2025 2 Years On report, released at Trends today, says the priority is to increase tourism during off-peak times and spread tourists around the country so that everyone benefits from the tourism boom. In Rotorua for Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
For those of you who spend most of your life at work, spare a thought for the employees of a technology development company in Beijing. This story's just come in. The company is encouraging its employees to sleep in bunk beds, to squeeze sleep in the office, to get most out of a working week. I'm treating this as a colour story, but it's actually disgraceful. Paul Chapman reports.
It's the end of a long working day at the Dumiyu Pen Technology Development Company in Beijing. But these employees aren't leaving. They have beds at the office, so they don't have to face commuting home after spending anything up to 16 hours at their desks. Liu Jianyu saves more than an hour each way, staying Monday to Friday in a cramped room with his colleagues.
As a member of Dumi, I think this is quite normal. As our boss always says, we are walking by our ambitions, so we won't feel tired. The hardest part of that, sometimes I can't see my child, just like our boss, who usually has a video chat with his child every night, which makes me feel sad. But I think men should take some responsibilities and make achievements at work.
Many Chinese tech startups are following suit to get more out of their staff during workdays. Such firms are booming in China, where investment by banks in tech ventures is fueling competition between them. Venture capital investments in tech startups last year more than doubled to over $32 billion. In the tough new world of Chinese tech startups, workers literally can sleep their way to the top, but at a cost to their family lives.
Ridiculous state of affairs. That report from Reuters. Now, in breaking news, this has just come in. 9 people have been charged in relation to the kidnapping and death of an Auckland woman who escaped from the boot of a moving car in March. We'll all remember this 50-year-old Jindirarat Prutsiripon died in Middlemore Hospital after falling from a car in Papatoetoe. The police say she had links to Auckland's crime scene, which they were investigating. Today, 5 men have been charged with manslaughter and kidnapping. I'm just going to repeat that. 5 men have been charged with manslaughter and kidnapping. 3 more men and 1 woman have also been charged only in relation to the kidnapping. That's 3 men and 1 woman have been charged only in relation to the kidnapping. The police say some of those arrested are members of the headhunters gang. The police say they can't rule out any more arrests. All 9 people will appear in court tomorrow. That case was about the 50-year-old Thai woman, Thai national, who died in Middlemore Hospital after falling from a car in Papatoetoe in March. There is, of course, another case ongoing at the moment about a person who has come out the back of a car further up State Highway 1, and that is still very much under investigation. We are coming up to the news at 6 o'clock. After the news, we're going to look more at the Panama Papers. We have a report from our gallery team about a New Zealander who seems to be connected with one of America's most wanted fugitives, or at least that's the accusation. Is it the case? He speaks out. And we look at this APN NZME Fairfax merger. What would it mean for small players? Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Great to have your company on behalf of the Checkpoint team. Thank you for being with us. 30 minutes to go in the program, lots in it. We really welcome your feedback. Text 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget, we are screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website, on which you can actually see Katrina Batten, who is sitting beside me, read the RNZ News.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. The Labour Party has accused the Prime Minister of losing control after he was thrown out of the House during a heated exchange over the Panama Papers. The Speaker, David Carter, ordered John Key to leave Parliament after he continued to shout despite being told by Mr Carter to stop. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
The last Prime Minister to be thrown out of the House was John Key's predecessor, Helen Clark, more than a decade ago in 2005. Mr Key was ordered out while he was answering a question from Greens co-leader James Shaw on why he refused to apologise to charities for linking them to Panama Papers. The charities say they had been a victim of a scam where fraudsters used their names as a front to hide their money in foreign trusts. Labour's leader Andrew Little says it's pretty shameful for the Prime Minister to be kicked out and says John Key lost control because he didn't like being asked to apologise. From Parliament, May Heron.
And as you just heard, the police have today charged 9 people with kidnapping and 5 of them with manslaughter in relation to the death of a woman escaped from the boot of a car in South Auckland in March. Jindarat Pritsiriporn, who was 50, died in Middlemore Hospital after falling from the boot of a moving car in Papatoetoe. The police said she had links to Auckland's crime scene, which they were investigating. They said they were following several lines of inquiry but declined to elaborate on what those were. A child has been transported to Dunedin Hospital after being attacked by a dog. St John responded to the attack on Cavill Street in the suburb of Tainui just after 2:30 this afternoon. A St John spokesperson says the girl sustained serious injuries. A Flaxmere campaigner says it's not just government agencies that need to take in the message of a coroner who's linked suicides and family violence. The coroner, Kala Nanagara, has found that 4 teenage girls who committed suicide within 13 months in the Hastings suburb were each exposed to family violence. She's recommending government agencies in the area do more to identify youth at risk of suicide and help them. Henare O'Keefe, who's led campaigns against violence in the suburb, agrees, but says families also need to improve.
A better approach from right across the board, not just agencies, a better approach from mums, dads, grandparents. It's a community mandate, I would suggest.
Flaxmere councillor Henare O'Keefe. The Hawke's Bay DHB says it's already improved procedures to follow up with people at risk of suicide and will set up a working party to review the coroner's report. A military policeman has described seeing soldiers from Linton Military Camp throwing themselves at the ground, bashing their heads against prison cell walls and holding imaginary conversations. Here's our reporter Michael Kropp.
The pair was among a group of soldiers who took the drug and were taken into police custody after behaving violently. None could remember taking the drug, which has a similar hallucinogenic effect to LSD, and the two men's lawyers say that's because their drinks were spiked. However, an expert witness says N-bomb is usually snorted or placed under the tongue and does not usually have any effect if swallowed. The court will hear from the final prosecution witnesses this morning, and the defence is expected to make its case this afternoon. In Linton, this is Michael Kropp.
The man who works for journalists' pay and conditions fears there'll be many job losses from plans to merge New Zealand's two main newspaper chains. The media companies APN and Fairfax have announced a plan to merge their operations in New Zealand under one roof. That would bring together the New Zealand Herald, the Christchurch Press, Dominion Post, News Talk ZB and others. Paul Tollich of the union A2 fears job cuts, but says there could be other effects on the essential role of the newspapers.
The traditional role of the media was to uncover the stories about the powerful and about major institutions which were abusing their power. It used to be called the Fourth Estate, and that was one of the pillars, along with courts and Parliament, that was the balance in a society, keep it free and democratic.
Paul Tollich fears this role will be jeopardised by this proposed merger. The Democratic presidential hopeful Bernie Sanders has won the West Virginia primary. His rival Hillary Clinton still holds a clear overall lead in the race for the party's nomination. But analysts say a win for Mr. Sanders will give him more leverage to influence the Democratic Party's election policies for the November vote. Addressing his supporters in West Virginia, Mr. Sanders said he was the best candidate to defeat Donald Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee.
I say to the Democrats who will be convening in Philadelphia for the convention in July, if you want the strongest candidate to defeat Donald Trump, that's us.
Bernie Sanders. Mrs. Clinton convincingly beat Barack Obama in West Virginia in 2008. To sport, gymnast Courtney McGregor celebrated her Olympic selection by doing handstands around the lounge. The 17-year-old is one of three gymnasts, along with men's artistic gymnast Mikhail Gordonov and trampolinist Dylan Schmidt, named in the Rio Olympic team. It's the biggest gymnastics team New Zealand has sent to an Olympics in more than 50 years. McGregor says her mother was even more ecstatic than she was when she got the news.
We kind of screamed and shouted and hugged each other. Yeah, it was really exciting.
Courtney McGregor. The All Whites captain Winston Reid will go down in the record books as the last ever goal scorer at Upton Park, the home of English Premier League football side West Ham. Reid scored as the Hammers beat Manchester United 3-2 to end their 112-year stay at the ground before heading to London's Olympic Park next season.
And a precious, precious moment. Is this the last ever goal at Upton Park? It will be Winston Reid who'll go down in history as he puts West Ham United 3-2 up.
The loss dented Manchester United's hopes of finishing fourth in the league and gaining a Champions League place for next season. Oklahoma City Thunder won Game 5 of their NBA Basketball Conference semi-final against San Antonio to go 3-2 up in the best-of-7 series. Oklahoma won the match 95-91, with New Zealand's Stephen Adams achieving another double-double, scoring 12 points and taking 11 rebounds. That's the news.
Revelations.
He is always surrounded by women in bikinis, servants offering champagne and caviar, armed bodyguards and bulletproof limos.
Reservations.
This is an ongoing database that's going to be recording 3 monthly, but there would be no basis for a land tax on the basis of the data that came out yesterday.
Reading, writing and maths.
You can get credits in literacy, in agriculture, to chemistry, to dance, to physical education. So the students scoop them up inadvertently.
Asking the right questions. Susie Ferguson and Guy and Espiner, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, why people with neurodisabilities are overrepresented in our prisons and what police and the justice sector need to understand. And after 10, the Balinese teenage sisters Malati and Isabel Vations, who are on a mission to ban plastic bags on their island by 2018. Join me, Lynn Freeman, in for Catherine Ryan after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and there are severe weather watches and warnings in force for many areas. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, scattered rain easing tomorrow. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, high cloud and some scattered rain tonight, clearing tomorrow. From Waikato to Wellington, including Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country, Wairarapa, Marlborough and Nelson. Rain becoming widespread today, heavy falls tonight, clearing most places tomorrow but returning to Nelson tomorrow night. Gale or severe gale northwesterlies for Wairarapa, Wellington and Marlborough, especially from tomorrow afternoon. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, rain heavy at times with squally thunderstorms, severe thunderstorms possible tomorrow. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, scattered rain at times, but mostly dry in coastal places. Gale or severe gale northwesterlies, mainly inland. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, but a period of rain tomorrow morning, possibly heavy. It's just gone 6:09.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Appreciate it. Small and independent media companies across New Zealand are worried that a proposed merger between real heavyweights, APN News and Media and Fairfax Media, could cause their demise. If successful, the merger would combine NZME's New Zealand Herald newspaper, which is based in Auckland, and radio stations like News Talk ZB, with Fairfax newspapers like Wellington's Don Post, Christchurch's The Press, the Waikato Times, papers in Southland, Nelson, Marlborough, Taranaki, Manawatu, you name it, into one news gathering giant. So what would that mean for the smaller media outlets that produce news across the country? Pierre Smolder is the chief executive of the Star Media Group, which owns CTV and the Christchurch Star newspaper, among other titles. He's with us now from our newsroom in Christchurch. Nice to have you with us, Pierre. How is business? How is the Christchurch Star going?
Well, we're nearly 150 years and going strong. It's we've got a pretty good position, I think, in our local market. Funnily enough, we actually bought the paper from APN, which is now NZME, just about 3 years ago. So, you know, we sort of know a little bit about. We bought their whole South Island business, which included the Daily in Oamaru, from them about 3 years ago.
Okay, so what is it that you fear this merger will do to small community-based operations like yours?
Well, Christchurch is interesting because Christchurch is New Zealand's second city. Fairfax are already quite dominant here through the press, through Stuff and the press.co.nz and the community newspapers. If you then add to that the very strong radio stations, I think they'll have a very large share of the local advertising dollar. So we've got Simon Tong and Kieran Davis today both talking about overlapping complementary businesses or referring to international competition. But when you look at the local markets, what's actually happening in these local towns with the percentage of advertising dollars that they will then control, and what will they do with that?
Okay, so you are simply worried that you will be, and this is a pejorative term, and I don't mean that they're going to willfully do this, but by sheer size and monopoly position, you're going to be bullied out of the market.
Yeah, and I think, look, it's fair to say that Fairfax, we have a healthy but pretty, fierce competition with them.
Yeah.
And Fairfax at the moment are not afraid to leverage their strong position in the market. So they will go into deals with sponsorships and with events, and they will specifically say that we will only sponsor this or become a partner of yours if you do not advertise with the Star. And we'll get organisers of events saying, look, we'd love to be advertising with you, but Fairfax won't let us.
So excuse me, Pierre, is that taking place now? So that strikes me as slightly anti-competitive.
Yes, absolutely.
Is that so you absolutely know that to be the case?
Well, we know it happened with the Christchurch Art Gallery opening just a couple of months ago. So we were told quite clearly, even though that's a council organisation, that we would know there was going to be no spend and no advertising spend with us because the deal that they had tied up with Fairfax. So add to that the News Talk ZB and the radio stations, and I guess in Christchurch it would be a Fairfax-dominated operation. We're certainly concerned about that.
Okay. What do communities gain from having real local media, ground-up media? What stories does the Star tell, which the Press, which is a very good newspaper, doesn't tell?
The Press is an excellent newspaper, but it's becoming more and more hubbed out of the big centres. So we will tell stories that we cover very different stories. We take different angles. We're taking our lead story tomorrow is a story about the anchor projects in Christchurch. We've come up with some information about there's no deadlines going to be put on them now by the government. We cover stories of importance at our community newspaper level. We cover real grassroots stuff. We do a lot of stuff with schools. We do a lot of stuff with families. The Star is sort of a metro that covers the whole city, and the community papers that we've got are really more that grassroots, schools, community groups, family events, that kind of thing. So it's pretty important.
Can I ask you to leave Christchurch momentarily? I see here that APN also owns majority shareholdings in the Gisborne Herald and the Whakatane Beacon. So if they merge with Fairfax, do you have any idea what would happen to those titles?
I think, I'm not sure, they might be large minorities. I'm not sure. You may be right, they're majorities, but they have significant shareholdings anyway. So I'm not sure. I mean, we have a good relationship with NZME through the history
Content
with APN,
sharing.
that they used to own the Star.
And don't you have content sharing with them?
Content sharing, but also advertising.
Yeah.
We do, and we do advertising tie-ups. So we have partnerships for national advertising. So that will go, obviously, because Fairfax, fair enough, wouldn't want to partner with us. So I think it's a problem, and that access to national advertising dollars for regional independents, which is tough anyway, might become even tougher to get because they'll basically carve that up between themselves, I suppose.
Piers Mulder is the Chief Executive of the Star Media Group, which owns CTV and the Christchurch Star newspaper, among other titles. Thanks for joining us, Pierre, and thanks for going into our Christchurch newsroom to do so. Appreciate it. 5 years on from the country's biggest ever local body merger, the Auckland Council is being marked down for failing to tackle social inequality in our biggest city. A report reviewing the structure set up to run Auckland from 2010 has identified as a failure the lack of formal cooperation between the council and government on deep-seated inequality in Auckland, where roughly 1 in 3 New Zealanders live. Our Auckland correspondent Todd Niall has more.
The Committee for Auckland is a business-based think tank which lobbied for the amalgamation of Auckland's 8 local bodies into one. The goal was to create a less fragmented region, better equipped to tackle its big problems like transport. It commissioned a report which has found the structure created to run Auckland is generally doing the job well. But the committee's chief executive, Heather Shotter, says the Auckland Council has failed to tackle high levels of unemployment and social deprivation, especially in the south.
Well, this was highlighted in the reforms as being a key goal of the single governance structure for Auckland. And no, it is highlighted that there hasn't been as much traction in this area as it should be. So I think this is a real focus for the future.
The council itself made this work an early priority with its so-called Southern Initiative that had bold goals, but progress has been slow. The Mayor, Len Brown, acknowledges that.
Oh, so much to do, really. And we set up a social policy platform and had myself and the Minister, Paula Bennett, lead that, and that happened in the first term. It proved a little difficult because there's so much to do in that space.
So where's that relationship now with the government on the big social questions?
There's no formal relationship.
The former Minister of Social Development, Paula Bennett, doesn't seem to see that as a problem.
I suppose we're less interested in talking and more interested in the actual doing. So sitting around and having a bit of a hooey and no doey isn't kind of the mojo of this cabinet. So we've got a whole lot of actions that are going on around Auckland that are making a significant difference.
Elsewhere, the scorecard on Auckland's new structure finds poor or uneven engagement with communities as an issue needing work. It also says the 21 second-tier local boards should have a bigger role. Len Brown says that relationship is improving.
There will continue to be a shaking out period, probably for the next 3 to 6 years. And look, given the fact that it's been the largest amalgamation ever in politics in New Zealand and the largest corporate amalgamation, there's no surprise. I mean, these things don't happen overnight. It's been a hell of a change.
Some local boards are more effective than others. The chair of the Rural Franklin Board, Andy Baker, says his is working well with its community.
One of our board members is a former Pukekohe Borough Councillor, former Franklin District Councillor and a Franklin District Deputy Mayor. Says it's better now, the local, I guess, engagement is better now under the local board than it ever was, and that's because that's our focus.
Satisfied that the structure is generally working, the Committee for Auckland will next year seek an independent assessment of how well the council is running. Aucklanders get to air their views in the local body election in October. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Todd Niall.
18 minutes past 6. The New Zealander named in Parliament today in connection with one of America's most wanted fugitives says he's surprised his name has come up and denies doing anything wrong. Internet gambling tycoon Kelvin Edward Eyre has used a web of offshore companies, including a trust in New Zealand, to move his money around. Nicholas Franken has companies registered in Dunedin and is linked to Kelvin Eyre through one of his company's shareholdings in Elegant Step Group Limited. The New Zealand First MP, Ron Mark, asked this question in Parliament this afternoon.
To the Prime Minister, is Dunedin-based Incom Trustees Limited and its sole New Zealand director, Nicholas Franken, preserving our international reputation by helping to hide the assets of indicted gambling billionaire Calvin Ayre?
The Honourable Bill English on behalf of the Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I have no idea, but with respect to New Zealand's international reputation, there is no evidence for the assertions of the opposition that New Zealand's reputation for tax policy and transparency is in question.
Bill English was speaking on behalf of the Prime Minister because the Prime Minister had been booted out. We contacted Nicholas Franken in Singapore via Skype. He says the shareholding of his company, Incom Trustees Limited, an Elegant Step Group, was arranged for a Swiss firm with which he does a lot of business. Mr Franken told us it was a surprise to hear his name being raised in Parliament, as the company in Geneva who organised the deal would not want to be connected with any criminal activity.
I'm in this business as a lawyer already since 1970. And one of the big handicaps, like an old colleague of mine used to say, is always our clients. They only tell us what they want to tell us. So you never know. You know, there's always that risk that that a client does something which he doesn't tell you. And we go as far as we can. And normally when we find out anything like this, like there is money laundering or they haven't told us things, we just get rid of it. But funny enough, I had a conversation just the other day with the regulator in Malaysia, and he was very proud of all this legislation. I said, yeah, the problem is that, we don't really know often what clients do. And that's not typical to our industry. It's typical to many lawyers would have. You just imagine a lawyer, if he couldn't defend people who had broken the law, then he would have no business.
Nicholas Franken says he will now ask the Swiss firm more questions about the details of Incom's shareholding. Coming up at 6:30, which is in 8.5 minutes, with John Greaves, World Watch PM, a major victory in the fight against Islamic State in Iraq. And Britain's Prime Minister and the Queen are caught out making unguarded comments. Some business owners in central Christchurch fear a plan to deter motorists from their street and make it more pedestrian friendly will be the death of their shops. This is being much discussed in this part of the CBD. Business owners heard Christchurch City Council plans for the section of Victoria Street between Beeley Ave and Kilmore Street today. They think it will make a real difference to them. Our reporter Rachel Graham spoke to some of those affected.
The council is proposing to make a section of Victoria Street a sort of cul-de-sac. Motorists can still get in from side streets, but can't exit from Victoria Street. However, buses would still be able to use it as a thoroughfare. The council also wants to reduce access to the area of Victoria Street which leads on to Beeley Ave, add an area of slow road and remove 50 car parks. Rosie Austin has owned the gift shop Frogmore in Victoria Street for more than 20 years, but says she's now moving because of the council plans.
We've struggled since the earthquakes to be viable here because there's a reluctance of people returning to the city and the obstacles with all the roadworks and the building. So if the street's closed, there's just no through traffic. People will totally forget about us. We'll be like a little island. You know, retail stores like mine need people passing because a lot of impulse buying happens when they just pull up outside and come in.
Across the road is the jeweller Nicola Martinovic. She's doubtful the changes would bring any benefits to her store and says she suspects the changes are more about relieving congestion in neighbouring streets.
And it would be a shame to see this part of Victoria Street bear the brunt of trying to find a solution for a wider area.
Several other shop and restaurant operators in the area weren't willing to talk on the record, but did have worries about the proposal, in particular the reduction in car parks. One said she feared the changes would kill Victoria Street as a shopping destination. The chair of the council's Transport, Infrastructure and Environment Committee, Phil Clearwater, wasn't able to be reached for an interview, but in a media statement he says the changes prioritise access for people travelling by foot, bicycle and public transport. He added that conversations the council's had with local businesses have been generally positive. Francesca Armstrong, who works front of house at Black and White Coffee Cartel, says personally she's excited by the plan.
I've travelled quite a bit, and for example, I went to London and there's so many streets there that are closed off and it's just foot traffic, and it's incredible how busy it is, and even busier than, once you can drive down. Yeah, no, I'm pretty excited.
The council is holding drop-in sessions later this month on the plan and is accepting feedback until June the 2nd. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
Let's stay in Christchurch, and with a pretty impressive teenager heading to Rio, Volta, Courtney McGregor, who only turned 17 last November, was today named in the New Zealand Olympic team to compete alongside fellow gymnast Misha Kudanov and trampolinist Dylan Schmidt. The trio are our first Olympic gymnast since Sydney in 2000. Courtney told me today that making the team is a dream come true, a childhood dream come true, and it wouldn't have come about without her family's support, go mum and dad, and a lot of fundraising.
Over the years, I've travelled to Singapore, the United States, Australia, Canada, Europe, all over Europe, Doha, yeah, and it's all self-funded, so yeah, we've had to raise a lot of money, and yeah, my parents have put in a lot of hard work, and yeah, it's incredible.
When you say it was self-funded, your mum and dad stumped up for that, right? And then you actually had to give a little and desperately try to get money from wherever you could.
Yeah, so 99% of it, yeah, mum and dad had to find, and then, yeah, we got a bit more through the Give a Little page and some local grants and things like that, but yeah, most of it, mum and dad.
So how did you tell your mum and dad you made the team? How did you find out, and how did you tell them you'd made it?
So we had a FaceTime call actually with the CEO of Gym Sports New Zealand, and Mum was there with me. Dad was at work, but yeah, Mum was there with me, and it was really exciting, but we weren't allowed to tell anyone for a few days, so it was a bit hard, but yeah, it was really exciting.
And what was your mum's reaction?
We kind of screamed and shouted and hugged each other. Yeah, it was really exciting.
Are your parents going to be able to go with you to Rio? Will they be there in the stands to watch you compete?
I'm not sure yet. It's definitely accommodation and things like that over there are really expensive, but yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. Tell me, how many hours a day do you train?
So it's about 30 hours a week. A couple of days a week we do double training, so 7 hours a day, and the other days 4 hours. So yeah, a lot of training.
And what about schooling and all your study and your homework and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so for the last few years I've been doing correspondence school for my schooling, so that helps me fit in the gym.
So you are a remarkable young woman, aren't you? Because this is not like trying to be an All Black or a Silver Fern or whatever, where there are lots of people around you trying to do the same thing, and there is a huge culture of it in this country. Yeah. This has just been your private, individual ambition, hasn't it? You've just driven yourself.
Yeah, I've had a lot of support from the club at Christchurch School of Gymnastics, and mum and dad and family and friends and coaches, but yeah, it's definitely... we don't get a lot of recognition in gymnastics, and it's, yeah, all we really see is rugby and netball and sort of the big sports, but yeah, it's awesome that we're getting some recognition now.
Courtney, can you describe, in the seconds as you stand at the end of your run, preparing to run and vaults, what's going on in your head? Are you removing everything, or are you really focusing on something? What's happening?
I think right before I vault, I'm just taking a deep breath and not really thinking about anything. I know my body knows what to do, and I know what to do, so I just have to stand there and take a deep breath, really.
Are you excited? You're excited about the fact that you're going to do that in Rio, that you're going to vault in Rio, that you have made it to the Olympics?
Yeah, it's super exciting. I can't wait for the whole Olympic experience. Like the village and meeting all of the other New Zealand athletes, and yeah, it's going to be so much fun.
Courtney McGregor, who was 17 years old and is going to the Olympics. From the sublime to the ridiculous, just weeks after Prince's death, a man has come forward claiming to be the artist's biological son. Carlin Williams, a prisoner in jail on firearms charges, claims the late music legend is actually his real father. The Missouri man has filed a claim to be declared the icon's sole surviving legal heir and has even requested a blood test. Here's Vanessa Johnson.
Ever since Prince died unexpectedly last month at the age of 57, questions have loomed about his estate. Now a Colorado inmate is coming forward to claim he's the biological son and legal heir of the late pop star. Carlin Williams' petition was accompanied by a sworn affidavit filed by a woman claiming to be his mother. But according to Prince's sister, the singer had no will and no surviving offspring. The value of the singer's music catalog has been estimated at more than $500 million. Meanwhile, detectives returned to Prince's Paisley Park compound in Chanhassen, Minnesota Tuesday. The Carver County Sheriff's Department says it's part of an ongoing investigation into the singer's death.
A rather sad report from Reuters ending our program for tonight. Thank you for being with us. We're delighted to have your company. We will be back, the whole Checkpoint team, on RNZ National tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The police have charged 9 people, including headhunters gang members, over the death of a woman who escaped from a car boot in South Auckland in March. The Labour Party has accused the Prime Minister of losing control after he was thrown out of Parliament during a heated exchange over the Panama Papers. The Dunedin City Council is investigating a dog attack that's left a young girl in hospital with serious injuries. A Flexmere councillor is calling for a hard line on family violence after 4 teenagers committed suicide within 13 months in the Hastings suburb. And a military policeman says a soldier who apparently took the drug N-bomb had to be restrained to stop him from bashing his face against a prison cell wall. Our next news and weather is at 7.